Yes, welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication Guy, having a conversation with a widely recognized business communication expert so that you and I will learn tips and strategies that will boost our business. Today, coming to us from Jupiter, Florida, we have Bob Burg. Bob has over 30 years experience successfully showing entrepreneurs, leaders, and sales professionals how to communicate their value and accelerate their business growth. Although for years Bob was best known for his sales classic, the book Endless Referrals, is his business parable, The Go Giver, co authored with John David Mann, that has created a worldwide movement. While that book is part of a four-book series, The Go Giver itself has sold more than 1 million copies and been translated into 30 languages. It was rated number 10 on Inc. magazine's list of the most motivational books ever written and was on HubSpot's 20 most highly rated sales books of all time. Tremendously impressive. Bob is co founder of the Go Giver Community Network, the first of its kind online business community created by and for Go Givers. He's an advocate, supporter, and defender of the free enterprise system, believing, as I do, that the amount of money one makes is directly proportional to how many people they serve. And believe me, Bob Burg serves thousands of people. Bob is also an unapologetic animal fanatic and served on the board of directors of Furry Friends Adoption and Clinic in his town of Jupiter, Georgia. So please join me now in welcoming Bob Burg. Hello, Bob.
Hey, Dr. Bill, always great to speak with you.
It's great to have a lively conversation with you, which every conversation with you is, Bob. As I go back and think of when I first became acquainted with you, one item that struck me from the outset was the different approach that you took and that you recommended for networking. And I'll have to say that I've often thought that networking determines our network worth, and networking beats not working. So it's very important. And what I remember you're saying 25 years ago when I first became acquainted with you, I remember you saying that the best question to ask a new acquaintance that you meet is, who would be the best customer for you? Why is that slant one that you recommend, Bob? It's very different from us handing them our business card and making our spiel. So why that approach?
Well, I think that's really part of the answer. It distinguishes you from everyone else who kind of, and not everyone else, of course, but many people who look at networking as kind of, the fast walking, slick talking sales guy who kind of works the crowd. They backhand, slap hand, shake hands, stick that business card into your face and say, hey, give me a call, cut you a deal. And basically, what they're trying to do, Dr. Bill, is as soon as they meet you, they are trying to sell you their hat. And
Instant sales, instant sales.
right. And when you have a whole bunch of people doing that, you have really nothing happens. And people get disgusted. Oh, networking doesn't work. Well, that kind doesn't, if that's how you were to define networking. Now, we define networking a little bit differently, and that is the cultivating of mutually beneficial give and take, or really give and receive win-win relationships. The key is on the give part. How do I, from the moment I meet this other human being, communicate value to them? And it really begins, and you talk about this in your book and in your teaching. It's really making it about them. It's making the focus about them. One of the things I learned when I first got into sales 40 or so years ago, and I was doing a lot of prospecting on the phone and relationship building on the phone and closing on the phone. Well, what I realized really quickly is nobody ever hung up the phone on me while they were talking. It was really
Yes.
amazing discovery, right? And it's the same in person, on the telephone, on Zoom, wherever. So we want to focus on them. Ask them questions about themselves. How did you get started in your business? What do you enjoy most about what you do? And then, as you talked about, what I call the one key question that will separate you from the rest: how can I know if someone I'm speaking with is a good prospect or a good customer, or a good client for you?
And they haven't heard that before,
No,
probably.
probably not.
They haven't heard it. An important point here too, Bob, is that I think all of us would assume this, but it's good to emphasize it. Once you get that information, you need to act on it.
Absolutely.
And I think you said this in your book that I read about that. You don't just hear that. I mean, in a few days, you call them and you say, "I've got that ideal client that I think you should talk to, and I'll help you meet them."
Yeah. And I mean, I would start out that very day after you've had that conversation, and you're back in your office or your home, what have you, is to send a personalized handwritten note of thanks to that person. Handwritten, just that, hi, Dave, or hi, Mary. Thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you. If I can ever refer business your way, I certainly will. Best regards. Put your name, put it in an envelope, hand stamp it, hand write it, send it out that day. It's going to get on their desk the next day, and imagine what they're thinking as they take that out and they see your personalized note card, which I would say 8.5 by 3 inches, have a nice professional head and shoulders photo of you, because we know people think in pictures. We process information different ways, but we think in pictures. And with that, your contact information and that note, and it says to that person, wow, there's a person who not only focused on me, not only wants to find business from me, but actually followed through with a personalized note, right? And you can also connect with that person on social media. Oh, that's fine. But as you said, the big thing is look for ways you can really add value to their lives and communicate that. Make that connection when you can, and that speaks volumes.
Yes, and I'm so happy you mentioned the personal note because we've become in the last 20 years we've been become so accustomed to using our wonderful new technology, and I love our technology. I embrace it. I learn as much as I can, and I came a long way because I ran from it for so many years when I was in management. And then suddenly, Bob, I had nobody to delegate it to. So I really have come to embrace technology, and I love following up with people that way. But having done that and having learned how to do it, many of us have forgotten. Okay, how do you really set yourself apart? It's not because you sent a better email. It's not because you message them. It's that handwritten note which gives the personal touch. I'm so delighted to hear you mention that.
Yeah. It really is powerful. Even back in the day when before BT, before technology, right? Was so that was we all grew up with our moms teaching us to write notes after we attended a friend's birthday party or received a gift, of course. But how many people really even sent notes? Once they got in the business world, very few. But the ones who did really stood out. Well, now that technology is so prevalent, how much more so does a personal handwritten thank you note stand out? Help you stand out from the crowd. So it's not a matter of either technology or pen and paper or whatever. It's both.
It's both. It's
It's
both.
going to help you make a better connection with another human being. That's the way to go. It's both, though. Yeah.
And sometimes I will send a brief video follow-up.
Hmm.
And that, of course, is something else that not everybody will do. And
Right.
yet I would go back and say that that handwritten personal note is the rarest and therefore maybe the most valuable follow-up that we can do. Getting back, Bob, to something else that I learned from you early on, you wrote a book, Winning Without Intimidation.
Without.
My gosh, don't you have to intimidate somebody? Don't you have to scare them? Don't you have to tell them that without your services, they'll go broke and their business will close? Uh, what was the major points what were the major points that you tried to get across? And I know you did get across in your book, Winning Without Intimidation.
Dr. Bill, there are really two ways to influence a person. When we say influence, by definition, influence simply means the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. So there's two ways to do that. There's through persuasion and there's manipulation. Manipulation is compliance. It's force or the threat of force. Can that ever work? Sure. But it's not very sustainable and it feels really yucky, right? Just not a good way to do things. But then there's persuasion. Persuasion is earning another person's commitment to your idea. So when we win without depending upon intimidation, manipulation, fraud, force, compliant. Well, not only are our chances much better of another human being actually buying into our idea, but it's much, much more sustainable.
And it builds our credibility in a way that intimidation could not do. And someone who has been intimidated into a sale or an agreement, they're not going to be telling everybody else what a great person you are to work with.
No.
Bob, we're going to come back in a minute to talk about the Go Giver, which, if anybody owns a brand, that is your brand. So we'll come back in just a few seconds to talk about that.
Do you wish you felt confident about giving speeches? Do you want to deal with difficult people constructively? And what about becoming more persuasive in sales? Then keep listening now to Dr. Bill Lampton. He spent 20 years in management, so he knows the communication skills you need for success. I urge you to call the Biz Communication Guy today for a no-cost but very valuable 30-minute discussion about your communication challenges. Call now, 678-316-4300. Again, that's 678-316-4300.
Bob, it was possibly 20 or more years ago that I became familiar with a phrase that you have made ring around the world, and that's the phrase "the Go Giver." And then in earlier generations, and here again is the contrast that you have brought us to see with such value. In previous generations, the opposite was what we were taught to be: the go-getter, the one who just who gets what they want, however they get it, and whoever they get it through. And maybe principles don't matter as much. But first of all, how did you come across this concept yourself, and define it for us, please?
Sure. Well, so many years ago, I had a book called Endless Referrals, which was basically a how-to guide for entrepreneurs and salespeople who knew they had a great product or service. They knew it brought lots of value to people, but they didn't necessarily feel comfortable going into their local communities and creating those relationships that would cause people to want to do business with them directly and or refer them to others. So Endless Referrals was that guide. The basic premise was, all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. That's kind of my catchphrase, if you will, right? But I always thought, but it was a how-to book. And I always thought, wouldn't it be great if we could take that basic principle and turn it into a parable, right? Because I'd always enjoyed reading parables and I think stories. Well, you're a great storyteller and communicator, so stories connect on a much deeper level. And I thought, what if we could take that premise and turn it into a story? So I sat on it for a number of years, and then I fortunately met John David Mann, who was editor-in-chief of a magazine I used to write for, and he had a reputation amongst those who knew him as being a brilliant writer and storyteller. So I shared this idea with John. And by the way, the name Go Giver came up because when you look at the people who are able to both quickly and sustainably create those know, like, and trust relationships, there's one commonality to them. They are givers. They're always looking to give value to others. They're always looking out for the best interests of their prospective customers and clients. So go givers, right? So
I think in line with that, Bob, you have, as I have, known many executives in top companies, people who are featured in Fortune magazine and everywhere else. And one of the things that seems to be not quite universal, but very common, is that many of them have wonderful philanthropic interests. Now, I mentioned in the introduction your interest in animals and humane society, and I want you to know that I thank you, and my little toy poodle Georgia thanks you as well. But it is this ties in with what you're saying, that those who are most successful are go-givers across the board, not just in their business life.
right. I think any universal law or principle, as Pindar, the main mentor in the story, shared with Joe, the protege, universal laws tend to go across the board. So whether we're talking about success in terms of financial, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, social, relational, what have you, I think the basic principles tend to work, tend to apply. And in a person, Dr. Bill, who is doing great financially, but physically they're a mess, or their relationships are a mess, probably not a happy person. You know what I'm saying? And it's the same in other ways. You can be spiritually great and have wonderful relationships, but if you don't have money to pay the rent, it makes it hard to live your values in a sense. So I think it's important to really be able to do the correct things in the success process that helps us to become successful across the board.
Very well stated. You have, I wouldn't begin to guess how many hundreds of audiences you've faced in the past 30 years in your highly successful speaking career. There are many executives and many rising executives who are going to need to be able to not only have great ideas, but to be able to express them clearly to groups and even persuasively to groups. So, Bob, thinking out of your wonderful career as a speaker, what are some tips you would give, not really for professional speakers, but for executives who are going to direct board meetings and department meetings and speak at civic clubs and speak at their conferences and conventions? What are two or three top tips that you would share?
Well, the first one is I'd suggest they call you, since that's
And that was not pre-planned. That's spontaneous.
but if they insisted on talking to me, the first thing I'd say is this, Dr. Bill, is your topic, and I think so often what intimidates us when we're first going to speak is, well, what if I don't say the exact right thing? All right. You know what? You know your topic. And as long as you do, you're in a good space first. Okay. Secondly, don't go up there and wing it. Prepare and practice and drill and rehearse. People say, oh, but isn't that phony to do that? Well, I don't know. Have you ever been to a Broadway play and see those amazing actors up there night after night after night after? Do you think they're winging it? No. They used to say Yul Brynner, who played the King, and the King and I don't know how many thousands and thousands of performances.
Yes, he did.
They said he didn't play the King; he was the King, right?
Yes.
It got so far into his essence. But first, he started with a script. He first learned what he was supposed to say, and he practiced. Okay, but then here's the main thing. So you know your stuff, you're prepared. Here's the third thing. It's all about them. It's about your audience. So when you go up there, understand that your job is not to give a great speech, okay? Your job is to provide immense value for your audience. And as long as that's your focus, you're going to do just fine.
Wonderful three-pointer there, Bob, very much so. And I would certainly go back to your first point, especially. You are speaking, as you put it, because you're qualified to speak. You should have confidence because you're in a position to do that. people. And one of the worst things that many people do is get up and say, well, I'm not an authority on this topic. People are going to tune out immediately. Recognize that you are an authority. And then this bit you mentioned about being audience centered. One of the points I make with my speech coaching clients is, why the heck are you afraid of an audience? An audience, these are not your critics, which you often think. These are your cheerleaders.
Yeah,
They want you to succeed.
they do want you to succeed. Yeah,
Bob,
great.
talking with you is entertaining, educational, informative, inspiring. I'm running out of adjectives. And I know our viewers and our podcast listeners will agree with me fully. So there are those, I'm sure, who want your contact information. So please tell us how to get in touch with you.
Sure. It's just Burg, BURG.com. I like to keep things simple.
Keep it simple, stupid. Remember that old KISS formula.
Right.
I want to thank Bob Burg so much for being our guest on the Biz Communication Show. I thank those of you who have been with us today, either as viewers or listeners. And since Bob's given his contact information, I'm glad to give mine. Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication Guy. So logically, my website is B-I-Z, bizcommunicationguy.com. I invite you to go there, check my services for corporations and leaders. And then I invite you as well to go to my YouTube channel. YouTube channel is listed. Go in the search section, type in Bill Lampton, Ph.D. You'll find not only this video, but you will find many others where I've interviewed experts, and then some where I've given instructions on my own. And then certainly, I would very much welcome the opportunity to talk with you. My phone number, 678-316-4300. Again, 678-316-4300. Let's have an introductory, no obligation conversation about your communication challenges and how I can assist you with them. Bob, wrapping it up, what closing thoughts would you have for us, Mr. Go-Giver?
Well, let's see. About 38 years ago, and I say that because I was about 2 years into my sales career, which began 40 years ago. I remember a wise older man. I call him a drive-by mentor because I didn't know him very well, and it's probably the only piece of advice I ever received from him. But a good friend of mine, Dondi Scumaci, she and I call these drive-by mentors. They happen to come along at the exact right time with the right information at the moment you are ready to receive it. And I was in the middle of a sales slump, and he said to me, Burg, he was a last name kind of guy. He said, Burg, if you want to make a lot of money in sales, he said, don't have making money as your target. Your target is serving others. Now, when you hit the target, he said, you'll get a reward. And that reward will come in the form of money. And you can do with that money whatever you choose. But never forget, the money is simply the reward for hitting the target. It isn't the target itself. Your target is serving others.
A perfect way to conclude our conversation, Bob. And it reflects and epitomizes not only your career, but your life as well. And I must close with a personal experience that I had with you that you may or may not remember, but you were speaking in Atlanta. I'm an hour's drive away from there in Gainesville, Georgia.
Sure.
You invited me to come over. I came over for a breakfast meeting. And before the meeting started and you had 200 or 300 people in the audience, you said to me, Bill, you've written a book, haven't you? And I said, yes. You said, do you have a copy with you? I said, of course, I've got some copies in the trunk. You had me bring a book in and you held it before the audience. And instead of plugging your material, you were plugging my book and telling them that this would be very worthwhile for them. And to me, that's a sketch of Bob Burg right there.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
Thanks again to those of you who were with us, and be with us next time for another exciting and informative rendition of the Biz Communication Show.